I'm going to call this meeting to order now. It is 7:05 p.m. on May 15th, 2023. And this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission. Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Transition Plan. If the Spanish language interpreter, Maria, can please give the information on Spanish language interpretation now, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Esta reunión es una reunión pública sujeta a la ley del Estado de Oregón y a las reglas administrativas de la ciudad de Portland y va a ser grabada. La interpretación en español está disponible para esta reunión. Cuando vaya a acceder la interpretación en español, verá el video desde los altavoces, pero el audio va a entrar reemplazado por el intérprete. Para acceder a este servicio, por favor, haga clic en la interpretación de lenguaje, en los controles de la reunión de Zoom, en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y seleccione español.
Thank you so much, Maria. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Leslie. Please pin the video feed to see their interpretation. Oh, and I believe Hannah also. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance, but please note this is an automatic captioning service and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. Now I would like to hand the meeting over to the co-chairs for the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. I'm Catherine McDowell. I'm one of the co-chairs of this subcommittee. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Both the members of the subcommittee, all of our wonderful staff, and any participants in the audience. And I should say I use she, her pronouns. So I'll be doing the land acknowledgement tonight, and we use, as we do in all of our meetings, the land acknowledgement that's on display at City Hall. We acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Klamath, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Coahuila, Malala, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past in working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationship to these lands and waters. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. We're now going to turn to our community agreements, and I invite us to read through the community agreements. And I will ask Corinne to advance the slides as we go through, and then on the third slide, we'll indicate our agreement with them. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. If you notice that a conversation is coming close to violating a community agreement, please call your fellow commission members in gently and with compassion. If you are called in, please take a moment to consider how you can best participate in the space while still respecting the community agreements and making space for everyone. Do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our colleagues and collaborators if needed? May I see thumbs up or jazz hands? Thank you so very much. I will now pass it over to co-chairs to discuss the timeline.
Thanks, Dr. Moses.
Mm-hmm.
The Police Accountability Commission has split its work into 6 phases. It is now moving into the 5th phase of work, transition plan and broader system. The commission will work until August 31st, 2023, and will present its proposals to the City Council for their consideration and approval. The next slide, please. This slide shows the outcome documents for the transition plan and broader system phase, based on the agenda and scope approved by the commission. Now that the PAC has developed a rough draft of what the new system will look like, the PAC will, in this phase, develop a transition plan for how to get from here to there, an understanding of how the process of implementing the new system will change or interact with other police oversight systems and levels of government, and also will name the new oversight board and bureau. Slide 9, thank you. This slide is the current project plan for the transition plan and broader system phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now through the end of the phase. Today's meeting falls into the green box with the purple border near the bottom of the left screen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I have slide 10 and then 11. We're getting close. All right, following today, here are the upcoming meetings of the PAC. We'd like to highlight the subcommittee on broader systems meets Thursday, May 18th, and this subcommittee meets next week on Thursday, May 25th. Today's meeting is the first meeting of the subcommittee, and we'll start with member introductions. Then we will review the subcommittee's mandate. After that, we'll have some discussion around desired briefers for the subcommittee and around the draft outline of the eventual transition plan. Finally, there will be open public comment on anything under the subcommittee's work plan.
Beautiful. Thank you so very much. I so appreciate that. We're going to do introductions of the subcommittee members. So, Corinne, if you could stop sharing, that would be lovely. And I am going to go into gallery view so I can see everyone. And I'm going to start with Cherie, if you don't mind. Can you give us your name, your pronouns, and if you represent an organization or not? And what has been really impactful for you so far? Just super quick, super quick.
Impactful as in being a member of the PAC or?
Yeah, well, yeah, yes. In your experience so far with the PAC, what has been really impactful for you so far? Super quick.
Okay, my name's Cherie. My pronouns are she, her, and I don't necessarily represent an organization. I am a small business owner in the local Portland area. I've been doing business in Northeast Portland for almost 25 years now. A lot of the people that I work with are immigrants and a lot of non-English speaking. I think one of the things that has impacted me a lot, I'm a newbie, but when I heard people recently say that they don't, they don't think that the Portland police as it is ever going to be not racist. That was so sad. I hope that's not the future, but that was very impactful. And one other thing that was very impactful has been seeing that there is so much support in the community for what we're trying to do. And a lot of respect and love comes to us for the work that we're doing, and seeing the passion that the community has for this.
Thank you so much, Cherie. I so appreciate that. Faith, Commissioner Faith, Co-Chair Faith. I'll get your title right this time.
Thank you. No problem. Hi, I'm Faith Aiken. I use she, her pronouns. I am here as a representative. I think that's things have switched around from an organization called L'Arche Portland, which is an organization that works specifically with folks with intellectual disabilities. I have been, I'm a card-carrying disabled person and have been part of the disability advocacy community for a long time, and mostly through using data and storytelling. So that's why I'm here. One thing that has been very impactful for me, I know that I kind of complain about co-editing documents via Zoom. It's not my favorite activity, but the sheer volume of what we have already been able to accomplish is really impactful to me. We have done some really amazing work and worked through conflict and disagreements. And I think there's a lot of, I work in the city of Portland, there can be a lot of skepticism around community-led efforts. And I feel really proud to be a part of a community-led effort that has really accomplished a lot.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair. So appreciate that. Commissioner Tim, welcome in.
Thank you very much. Yeah, hi, I'm Tim Pitts. I use he, him pronouns. And I think what's been really impactful to me is in just being on the commission for a couple of months, I've been just like shocked to see sort of what the scope of work really is and just how hard everybody's working on doing so much and how important the work is and, you know, what we're creating here. So I just think it's really exciting and inspiring, and I'm excited to be here to kick off a new committee to see what we can accomplish in this phase. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Charlie, welcome in.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Charlie Michelle Wesley, she, her pronouns. Maybe some things you haven't heard me say before or know, besides representing people from over-policed neighborhoods and people that have been in the streets for years. I'm also a tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and I'm on their tribal health committee. And they asked me to be on that for my experience as a drug and alcohol counselor, addiction prevention, my support of folks in recovery with dual issues, including mental health issues, a longtime member of NAMI, and on a nonprofit for 15 years that addresses and does trainings around fetal alcohol. And yeah, just always in positions. I also do distribution of foods for the homeless, houseless communities. And so I'm out there a lot and I hear a lot. And I try to bring that to the work we do here. I think the most impactful thing since I've been on the Police Accountability Commission, I want to find something positive to say. There's a lot of skepticism from the communities I represent, downright. Yeah, just don't believe that anything we can do can make a difference. And seeing all of the barriers that we've learned exist now that I've been on this commission for a while. Just the realization that it's just a ton of baby steps that are going to get us there someday, probably long after I'm gone, but we can't give up. Just can't give up. Yeah, I know that.
Thank you so very much, Commissioner Charlie. Commissioner Ajay.
Hey everyone, Ajay Mechi. I am a digital organizer with Freedom to Thrive, also reimagining community safety manager with Unite Oregon. What else? I also do a lot of volunteer work around mental health stuff. Yeah, I have my peer counselor certification and volunteer at Lines for Life, and also volunteer at a psychedelic integration hotline. And yeah, I do a lot of volunteer work around that. And yeah, in terms of most impactful, I would say, and this isn't necessarily a positive thing, but I thought it was very impactful when we went to a community, we had a community session, and, you know, there was a few people that, you know, despite the lawsuit and the Department of Justice having to step in, despite, you know, 82% of Portlanders supporting this, were very much, you know, against the notion of police accountability. And, you know, it was impactful for me because it made me realize how much of this, you know, battle for justice for over police communities is like a battle of ideology, and how much like white vigilantism and policing like go hand in hand. And, you know, as one grows stronger, so does the other, and how intricately tied together they are. And so, you know, when you have these like people that are like, no, there shouldn't be any accountability, really, they're saying there shouldn't be any accountability for them either, because, you know, there's a sense in which Black and brown bodies are made to be policed and surveilled, and white bodies are made to police them, like after slavery, white folks were deputized into, tracking down runaway slaves. And yeah, so I think a lot about that. And that moment just kind of like reminded me of that. So thanks.
Thank you so very much. Commissioner Dan. Welcome in.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of the commission. I'm also a member of a group, Port and Cop Watch, that started in 1992. We just put out our 89th issue of our newsletter, which comes out 3 times a year. So you do the math on that. And I guess, kind of what is, I'm thinking right now about what's impactful to me about working on this commission, which is really honing my skills to fly by the seat of my pants and gather information together, however little time we have to go over it, and make it work. And I think we've been able to make it work, even though people have different styles about when and how often and how early information gets shared. I think we still make things work, and I think that's really what's great about this commission. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Commissioner Angie.
Hi there, I'm Angie Tomlinson. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you, Dr. Moses. I think I am not a volunteer member of a lot of organizations like you guys are, but I am on this commission most likely because my father was murdered by police a lot of years ago. I don't want to say a million years ago because that sounds very disrespectful, but so that's the group that I am in. But and to be quite honest, recently I was kind of very exhausted by working so hard on this committee. And somebody nonchalantly said, oh yeah, police accountability, yada, yada, so unsexy. And it just totally threw me into a funk for a couple of weeks. And I was feeling pretty defeated about the work we're doing, which is really, I know I'm always like this weird Pollyanna person, always trying to find the positive in these situations. But I was really in a funk for the last couple of weeks, and I went to the public information session last Saturday, and that just like put steel in my backbone for this, because it's so important, and one person like blowing off my efforts should not make that much difference. And it was really stupid of me to even like consider that. So the work that we're doing is so important. Yes, we're volunteers, and yes, we have to like, we don't get a life other than like working full time and doing this commission, but it's so worth it. So thank you all for being here. It is so worth it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Co-Chair Catherine. Welcome in.
Thank you. I already introduced myself and identified my pronouns as she, her. So I'll just quickly say that I really appreciated hearing from all of you. I feel like I've known many of you for now over a year, and I'm still learning about each of you, even those of you who I've known for quite a while. So I'm honored to be a part of this group with you. And I just want to say that what has been most impactful for me is the community sessions we've conducted, for better or for worse. I was at the one that Jay was talking about that was really upsetting, but was also at the one that Angie was talking about this weekend, which was really powerful in a different way. So, those are the sessions that keep me going to really keep us grounded, I think, collectively in what we're doing and why we're doing it. So for better or for worse. So that's what I'd say. Thank you so much, Dr. Moses.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time, for your compassion, for all that you bring into these meetings and into this work. I just want to acknowledge again and say thank you so very much. So first, the subcommittee will review the commission's mandate as it relates to this issue, which is the subcommittee overview. So we're going to look at the timeline and how it relates to other subcommittees. And I am going to pass this over to staff.
Yes, thank you. So we have several documents to go through today, so we'll just kind of focus on the ones that have a lot of relevant content. Starting with, we'll go down the list, starting with the section 210, starting with Council Resolutions 37527 and 37548. So the first of those is pretty easy to skip by because there is nothing in there that relates to the transition specifically. That's the one that sets up the commission, 37527. Exhibit A to 37528 has all the mandated duties of the commission. The color coding here is designed to be where this goes or where it went. Blue is things that were done in a previous phase. Orange is something that the full commission will be doing, and yellow is ongoing. The color that is relevant to this subcommittee is green, and you can see it all on the screen right now. The portions of the transition plan section that the commission put into this subcommittee's work are here. Funding in the IPR to maintain existing staffing and resources, and we'll talk about where that requirement came from originally. How existing misconduct investigations and cases that will be covered by the new oversight board, how they're handled, how to incorporate the current best practices and procedures into the new system, how to transfer existing files and institutional knowledge over, and human resources preference rules as they relate to different parts of the current oversight system, which may wind down and which have current employees that may or may not, at the commission's recommendation, have preference to apply for new positions. So that's the first of these documents, Council Resolution 37548, and it's what the council gave as a mandate to the PAC. Within that scope, the PAC put that work within this phase of work. So as co-chairs mentioned, the commission divided its work into 6 phases of work. The portion here that is relevant crosses the page break. It's section F, IPR continuing and concluding work on ongoing investigations, existing staff getting preference to apply, key dates and transfer of responsibilities. All of that the commission took from its larger scope of work and put specifically into this phase, along with the outcome document of a transition plan. Next comes the subcommittee mandate and timeline, which is how the commission took what was assigned to this phase of work and assigned it to this specific subcommittee. And here on April 24th, the commission, this is all the same content you saw earlier in the highlighted document, and assigned these 2 particular parts of transition details over to this particular subcommittee. These are not the only things, but this is where the sort of source of all of that came from. And there's an awkward page break here, sorry. So that's the subcommittee mandate. In terms of the timeline, this phase of work is expected to go till roughly the end of June. And the subcommittee will meet between 4 and 5 times, hopefully 5. It's a slightly larger scope of work than some of the previous subcommittees in previous phases. And while we're in the overview, there is another subcommittee in this phase of work, the subcommittee on broader system. And there is a relationship there, which is that the decisions on what will happen to other parts of the current system. For example, there's been an open question as to whether the PAC might recommend eliminating PPB internal affairs. Those decisions on whether or not to recommend such things will be made in the other subcommittee, the subcommittee on broader system. But if that subcommittee should recommend changes or eliminations or sunsetting of other parts of the current system, the how and when of that would be part of this particular subcommittee. So that is sort of the purple elements of the highlighted text in the scope of work given to the commission by the city council. And I can pause here before we go into the sections, the review of the documents which co-chairs put into an outline document in just a moment. Any questions, comments, thoughts? I guess questions more so than anything else. Okay.
No questions. I don't see any questions.
Great.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Dan.
Hi, yeah, I did have it's more kind of a comment / question. As you described that last part about the question about internal affairs, I'm kind of feeling like this phase is similar to the last one, where our subcommittee and the other one possibly should have had our first meeting together, and at some point maybe we should share information with each other. So if we're supposed to be adopting the question about what happens to internal affairs and put it into a timeline, that can't happen if they finish after we do. So we have to finish in the same order. So I'm hoping that decision will be made early on, or we'll have a discussion together. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but there does seem to be some overlap. And I think there are other questions that I brought up, and maybe I'll bring them up later that are similar to that question.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Co-chair Catherine.
Yeah, Dan, Commissioner Dan raises a good point, and one that as we have been getting organized for this phase of work, I think also realized that we would need to do some sequencing between the two subcommittees, and we get going, but I think that subcommittee is going to need to finish first and at least give us heads up about their preliminary recommendations, so that we can then incorporate, to the extent they're winding things out, then we can incorporate that into our timeline and transition plan. So I think that, Dan, I think your point is one that we came to independently, and I think Samir's takeaway from that, staff's takeaway from that, was to just try to set the meeting schedules so that the other subcommittee ends up being done before this subcommittee. So because I think the final step of this subcommittee will be to incorporate their recommendations into our transition plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, observations? Staff, feel free to continue. Pretty please.
Yeah, thank you. So getting into the second.
Staff, it's a little hard to hear you. You're a little muffled.
We try to project a little bit more here. Is that
Yes.
better? Okay.
Yeah.
So the second part of this is reviewing the sort of content side. The rest was sort of how and why this is assigned to the subcommittee and in this phase. This is more on the content, what it needs to include, and this has been slightly reformatted just for legibility since the version that was sent out earlier. But the Charter 210 sections that relate to the transition plan, there aren't really any. We've already talked about this is the section that were highlighted before in terms of 37548 from the settlement agreement. So this is paragraph 195 of the U.S. Department of Justice versus City of Portland settlement agreement. This section was added as an order of the court as an amendment to the existing settlement agreement on April 29th, 2022. And it is how this particular project of the Police Accountability Commission and the Oversight Board were entered into the settlement agreement, were added to. So the 195, the main portion talks about it's just descriptive text. 195, this is actually the formatting is a little off here, complying with collective bargaining obligations. And then B, which is showing us 2 here, is the portion that relates directly to the commission. The sentence that is probably the most relevant here is this one: within 12 months of the council's adoption of the city code provisions, the new oversight board shall be staffed and operational, and IPR shall then cease taking on new work and complete any pending work. That is the very broad parameter in which the transition plan exists. It covers this period of time. It's the 4th step after the completion of the PAC's work. is a 12-month period after which the oversight board has to be fully operational, and what happens within that up to 12-month period is what this transition plan must cover in terms of those key dates and transfer responsibilities subsection. And then separately, there was also, and we're trying to get a copy of this, some additional information that was prepared by the city council related to this. And that's what's showing as 3, but is actually paragraph 195C refers to as well. So that is the settlement agreement portion. And I think I could pause here. I see Commissioner Angie had a question.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. I am just wondering, we had our first portion of this commission was the plannings. Oh gosh, I'm please correct me. I cannot think right now. It's been a really long day. The planning session where we were trying to when we were putting together our bylaws and what stages we wanted to put together. Are we expecting that this new board will also be doing that, or are we putting together those bylaws for them?
The first, under the oversight staff and board membership documents, which were just approved by the commission, the recommendation will include that the board membership will be able to develop their own bylaws, and that they will have support as requested by their staff, but that they do not need to have them vetted by the director or approved, I should say, by the director. So that is something that would possibly need to go into this transitional period is time for the membership to do that. There's also several other things, such as the need to have them appointed in the first place, and the selection process for all of that, which would fit into this. And we're going to get to some of that as we scroll down as well. Additionally, whatever other steps have to be taken in order for the new oversight board to be able to start taking on new cases or new complaints, which ostensibly would include hiring at least a significant portion of their staff, investigators and whatnot. So, yeah.
Thank you for clarifying, and I'm sorry if I jumped the gun.
No, it's a very good question. Thank you. So that's that is the whole of paragraph 195, which is the only place the PAC is and the process is explicitly mentioned in there. There are several other parts of the settlement agreement related to accountability that that the new oversight board would need to either comply with or make sure that that other portions of the city are in compliance with. But this is all of 195. And then scrolling down, sorry, Co-Chair Catherine.
Samir, it might be helpful for folks to hear a little bit more about what that timeline might mean. Just in thinking about like where we are now and like what the 60 days plus the 21 plus the 12, where that takes us to. I think that was helpful for me in our discussions around this, and that may be useful for others to we can't know exactly what these dates are, but I think just getting people's heads around kind of generally what timeframes we're probably looking at might be useful.
Sure. The PAC is authorized to meet until August 31st, 2023. Following that, there are 60 days in which the council can review the commission's proposal. And then because of all those other portions of the settlement agreement, which relate to accountability, they and sometimes task particular other entities with roles in the accountability process, the city council will need to propose amendments to the settlement agreement that allow for the creation of the new oversight board. So the first 60-day period is not for approving the recommendations of the PAC, but rather for reviewing them and then creating amendments to the broader settlement agreement that would allow for it. Those proposed amendments then go to the Department of Justice and the US Court, Judge Simon in the settlement agreement. They do not have a deadline here. It just says it goes straight into the next section, the third step. So the second step is it goes to the court and the DOJ, and they don't have a deadline to approve those. So then comes the third step, which is after they're approved by the United States, meaning the Department of Justice and the court, it comes back to the city council. If there are any changes to those proposed settlement agreement amendments, the city may need to approve those changes. And then in that 21-day period is also when they vote on the conforming city code provisions, which is actually the main portion of the PAC's recommendations. That approval would create the oversight board as an entity. Now, that's effectively day one of the 12-month period that we were just talking about here, or day zero, I guess. But even though the oversight board would exist, it wouldn't have any staff, it wouldn't have any members, it wouldn't have any bylaws, it wouldn't have any of those sorts of things. So what happens next is what this subcommittee will be talking about, is how does an oversight board that exists effectively in name only on day one with a city code structure surrounding it become a fully operational entity able to take on and begin addressing alleged misconduct and complaints of alleged misconduct within 12 months. And in terms of how long that will roughly take, it is very hard to predict because of the lack of a deadline for the Department of Justice and the court. If it hypothetically took, let's say, a month and a half, then that would put the response from the court in December, mid-December 2023, and the oversight board would be fully operational. The 21-day period would go into mid-January 2024, and the oversight board would be fully operational in January 2025. If, on the other hand, the Department of Justice and the court took a year, then the response would be received by the city at the end of October 2024. The 21-day period would go into late November 2024, and the oversight board would be fully operational by late November 2025. It's a pretty broad range there, but we've been operating kind of splitting the difference in terms of working assumptions, but there's absolutely no, it's a guess at present without knowing what city council would change and what that would do to the DOJ and court timeline.
Commissioner Angie.
Thank you so much for that explanation. It really helps. I do have one question related to city council conforming city code. Are we expected to have recommendations for that in these documents, in these transition documents? Just because, having worked for the city, I know how city code gets put together, and it's not the commissioners usually putting it together. So just a question about that. Thank you.
The code recommendation is the final recommendation of the PAC. So it is something that is effectively taking your areas of agreement and converting it into legal text over the course of the 6th phase. So it wouldn't necessarily be part of the transition, but it would be something that the PAC recommends. And the PAC can also, attach an accompanying report. There's a few other things that it can do, recommendations to the oversight board. There's lots of things that members have thought of that could accompany that, but at minimum, the PAC's job is effectively to write code with the assistance of legal counsel and propose that code to the city council.
Thank you so much, staff. Any other questions? Keep
And
going.
I saw a note on this, and this is a very, very rough visual timeline for the the timeline that was just mentioned, I'll pull it up in a second, but I can answer if Commissioner Dan had a question first.
Go right ahead, Commissioner Dan.
Well, actually, I guess this kind of leads into your graphical timeline. I just want to repeat what you already said, that even though there are parts of the settlement agreement that the board has to make sure get done right, the settlement agreement itself has to be amended to fit the way the oversight board is going to work as well. And, you know, the DOJ has a say in that. So if they don't like the product, they could send it back to city council for changes. But in theory, the settlement agreement itself has to conform to what we're designing.
Yes,
Thank you,
that is.
Commissioner Dan. Yep.
So I just want to note before I say anything, there is an assumption in here of 6 to 7 months, just that made it a round number for the DOJ. This could be much more, this could be much less, and nobody should necessarily get ahead of that in terms of what the date could be for when everything is coming in and going directly to the oversight board. But a hypothetical timeline, and I'll note that here would be September 1st to October 30th, 2023 is the first review proposing the settlement agreement. CPOB is the Community Police Oversight Board. That is not the final name. It's just the name that was given it in charter. There's a review. Then it goes back to the city council. They would need to adopt any ordinances that would finalize the settlement agreement amendments, as well as this is when they actually approve the PAC recommendations. The oversight board exists, and this is the transitional period that is actually what you're planning in this subcommittee. And then by the end of it, all new complaints go to the oversight board. And this could be shorter, right? It's up to a year. And then IPR is as per the settlement agreement, has to continue finishing them. So if it received a complaint one day before the changeover, it's supposed to conclude that unless you propose some other suggestion on how to address that. And again, hypothetical, not at all a fixed timeline. So we're working on narrowing that down as time goes on. Can I go on to the last two parts?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So, still the settlement agreement text, and as we get down here, there are some things that were mentioned in previous areas of agreement, which could very easily fit into this documentation. And it has the initial board recruitment and membership. And there's some specific notes in here about staggered terms, onboarding and training, and things like that. Information transfer, which it may be helpful for both the current and the ongoing, the new system to have access to some of the same information during the period while they overlap. Transitions, if any, of ongoing investigations, which is something that was mentioned in 37548. The council assigned scope of work of the commission, and then recommendations regarding board involvement in collective bargaining processes as well. And there's a lot of other possible things that might relate to. And then there was a section here on garden plot items, and going through those 4 that were found, and apologies for all this formatting stuff here, including data from the current system in new system reports. During this phase, especially if it was, for example, a 3-year look back, when 1 year is the new oversight board and 2 years is the old system, would possibly include those 2 years, was the garden plot item. And that's, again, a suggestion to consider, not something you're obligated to do. Initial training, especially in the context of not having experienced members to do the peer training for the initial members. The mayor's involvement in appointment prior to the charter change, any appointments that occur before January 1st, 2025, that are done by council, that council includes the mayor as a voting member, whereas after that, it's a 12-member council that does not include the mayor as a voting member. And finally, there was a note that the DOJ and settlement agreement themselves are temporary, and there are potentially items that are required currently because of the settlement agreement that might not be obligatory after the settlement agreement itself ends. The settlement agreement does not have a fixed end date. Oversimplifying here, and we can bring in an expert to give more information, but effectively, when the city is found to be in compliance, fully, substantially in compliance with the full settlement agreement, if it sustains that for a year, then the settlement agreement would end. And that is, again, an oversimplification. We can bring in someone who is an attorney to clarify more on that. And that concludes a lengthy review of everything here. Happy to take any other questions that come up.
Commissioner Sheree.
So I'm wondering, Samir or anybody else who can answer, and maybe this is because I'm a newbie, I'm not seeing it, but so we finish the project, hand it off, and then if they want to chop it up or make changes or do anything to it, then who does those changes? Would we need to meet again? Are we like over and done with in August, and then the city council would do those changes? How does that work?
Yeah, effectively, it's the latter. The Police Accountability Commission will finish its meetings and cease to exist on at the end of August 31st. And then after that, the recommendation goes to the city council. The process is what we just talked about, but ultimately, if there are any changes to be made to the document after that date, they would be made by the city council. If they were, they'll also have an influence from the DOJ and the court in relation to those settlement agreement amendments as well. But it's the decision is the exact text will be determined by city council based off of the PAC's recommendations.
Thank you, staff. I would love to invite in Commissioner Lovisa now that she's here, but I want to make sure that we have concluded this before doing that. Any other questions for staff at this juncture? Commissioner Dan.
Well, this is for staff and our co-chairs to help sort of get me better idea of the scope of our subcommittee versus what belongs in the other subcommittee. So one of the things I drew up a document based on the other areas of agreement we did already. I skipped one because I ran out of time. But one question that came up is the review of deadly force cases that's being done right now. The IPR hires a team to do that. They just published a report a month or two ago. And if IPR hires them again, but they're not finished and haven't published their report by the time the new board comes in, are we talking about what happens to that, or is that the other subcommittee that talks about that?
Great question, staff.
I'm happy to defer to co-chairs.
I think that's fine. Yes, Co-Chair Catherine.
So, well, I'm also happy to defer to Steph. I think we're sort of finding our way in terms of those boundaries, but at least my view has been that when we know under our previous area, you know, our previous work and the phases of work that an entity is going to be replaced, then I think it is up to this committee to talk about how that the transition from what currently exists to what is going to exist is in our that's within our purview. So we know IPR is going away. And so I think all of the issues around wrapping up IPR's work are within our jurisdiction. That's in contrast to for example, to internal affairs. That's a decision that the systems group is going to look at. Does internal affairs continue in some way or not? And then they make that decision. And that if they decide it does not continue, then that comes back to us to, like IPR, to figure out how do they wind down. So I think that's the way that's going to work. So we know IPR and we know PRB and we know CRC are all going away. So I think those transitions, what those transitions look like, are within this subcommittee's charge. So that's my take on it. Love to hear Faith's view and staff's view and anybody else's. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Faith.
Yeah, I agree with that, Catherine. I think one thing that comes up for me, Commissioner Dan, in that question is there are, it seems like there are a lot of small details. I mean, that's not small, that's significant, but I know that, I reviewed the document that you sent, and there's recommendations on body cam footage and storage. There's a lot of pieces that need to be discussed in the transition. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge, and maybe I've in my head created a miscellaneous section for us to acknowledge what is the container in which some of these ongoing projects and undetermined, unfinished work that's happening outside of IPR or in collaboration with IPR, how do we write enough language to provide guidance that covers the bases? And so I think I agree with Commissioner Catherine around the scope, but I think we also will need to consider how we are writing a section that is inclusive of things that we may just not know or things that we may miss.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Faith. Staff?
Yeah, I think what Co-Chair Catherine said is I think the best way of concisely describing a rule, as opposed to maybe describing the specific categories, but a rule for what goes where. I think that's spot on based on what the commission developed in the subcommittee structure. And then also what Co-Chair Faith said, definitely also accurate in terms of there will be some miscellaneous things. I think that may, and I'll need to go back and check the notes, but that may be why and other details was added to the conversation around the full commission deciding on the name for anything just where that sort of catch-all fits at the end of phase 5. But certainly in agreement with both of those two comments, and think that that is a very good question to illustrate the sort of challenge here. And to circle back to the previous comment and conversation, definitely a reason to time the subcommittees as appropriately as possible to allow for decisions to be made in the right order efficiently.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, staff. Great conversation. I would like to invite Commissioner Lavisa to introduce herself, and then I'm going to propose a 5-minute break. Commissioner Lavisa, welcome in. The request is if you could introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, the organization that you are representing, and then what has been most impactful for you so far serving on the PAC?
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Those are great questions. Hello, everyone. My name is Lavisa Lloyd. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I don't really represent a specific organization. I think I'm a member of over-policed communities. And I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for this overview because it's been really helpful. And what has been most impactful for me? Wow, probably the depth of the passion of the community members who have showed up and care about this issue. And we're really thankful for every single person who comes to these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, it is 8:04 and we are going to take a 6-minute break. We're going to come back at 8:10. Come back at 8:10, please. Thank you so much. All right, excellent conversation. I think it's time to move on to our round robin conversation on who would we want to hear from and be briefed by. So on our agenda is a discussion about briefings and who subcommittee members would like to hear from, invite in, and be briefed by. The discussion is around robin, so it's designed to have all members speak once and provide their ideas and thoughts on both questions. Each member has up to 2 minutes. I'll be calling on members to speak. After everyone's spoken, we can move on. Please feel free to pass if you need more time to think, and I can come back to you. So again, Corinne, you can stop sharing. Thank you so much. The question is, who would you want to hear from or be briefed by? And is there anybody who wants to start us out, or I can pick? So Ajay, I'm gonna ask you to start us out. If you you just took a bite. Okay. So Charlie,
I can go. If you don't mind my mouth half full.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, I guess it'd be interesting to be able to hear from other jurisdictions, other places that have implemented oversight systems, and particularly like I want to hear about the ones that are successful, but also the ones that went really, really poorly, to see like what kind of mistakes we can avoid, like as we're implementing ours. So I don't know. I know that the research document has like a ton of different jurisdictions that have had all different types of oversight boards and stuff like that. But I wonder if we can get in touch with folks that have been on those boards.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Charlie.
I guess my first thought was the obvious, even though we've already heard from them, but the input of IPR and those other two groups, how they basically transitioned into what they do now, what to avoid, what helped, etc. That's all I could think of, actually.
Commissioner Charlie, so that was IPR, CRC, and
That third one, I can't think of what it is.
okay, all righty. Might ask Commissioner Angie. Thank you so much, Commissioner Charlie.
Yeah, I guess I have questions about how it would function if internal affairs wasn't part of the city anymore. So I have questions about that. I don't know who it is that we ask, to tell you the truth, because I don't really want to hear from anybody in the police bureau, but I guess I want to, I mean, if this is really a consideration that internal affairs won't be around any longer, I guess I need to know what duties they are providing, other than what is happening, or what the new board will be doing. So I have questions about that, but I don't know who the expert is on that.
Great, thank you for that. Commissioner Sharif.
I'm gonna pass for now.
Great. Commissioner Tim.
I would echo that it would be interesting to hear from anyone in any other cities what they learned from implementing such a system. And I think it was when Commissioner Angie was talking just now, for some reason, it made me think of wondering if it's in our scope to wonder about, to me, one of the biggest things that they're going to have to do is the staffing up within 12 months, which seems like a tremendous task. And I was just curious if any other like Portland city bureaus have experience with like creating such a large organization in such a short period of time, because I would also just be curious, like, is there anything we should be taking into account or thinking about that would help, if I understand correctly, that we're charged with setting up the transition and how this transition is going to work, then I would love to know you know, is it feasible to, what do we need to do to make it feasible so that all these people can be hired and they can all be ready to go within 12 months of whatever. And then also briefly, yeah, super smart about IPR and whatever other organizations are maybe going away, because they would likely have some thoughts about how the transition outlooks, and not like we need to do what they're expecting. But if part of our work is sort of saying how we're going to take over, or how the new board is going to take over from here, from them, it might be interesting to hear what they think we should be, you know, hear their ideas for what we should be doing, because they might have some helpful insight. That's about it for now. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Commissioner Dan.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just suggest that a lot of these ideas are really good ideas. But we are now down to the last 3 months of our existence, and we have a lot of work to do by the end of June. And anytime we bring in a presenter, that's 20 to 45 minutes of our meeting time. So I'd like to think about having some of these conversations happen with a couple of members of the subcommittee, and then have reports back come to the full subcommittee, so that we don't spend our valuable meeting time having the presentations to everybody. I hope that makes sense to people, because I do think we should get all this information, but I don't know how we'll do it in that short period of time. And a group that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I don't know if it has to come to this subcommittee, but I really would like them to come to the full commission sooner rather than later, is the Portland Police Commanding Officers Association, which represents the lieutenants. And lieutenants make a lot of the decisions about whether or not officers are in or out of policy right now. They have a contract that's very similar to the Police Association, but we haven't heard from them at all yet. So I just want to remind everybody about that, in case it's either something that, again, I don't want to take up our time at our subcommittee, but I do want to hear from them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Lavisa.
Sure. Thanks, all. And I appreciate a lot of these suggestions, and I appreciate Commissioner Handelman's suggestions about just timeliness. And, it's like there's so many things that we just won't have time to figure out ourselves as we're doing this. And I kind of started to have this thought that, like, I was just wondering, is there a role or a budget, like, line item for someone who's like the chief transition officer, who's going to be kind of overseeing this transition, in real time. And, at first I thought maybe that's just the head of the board itself. But then I was like, no, I feel like this is sort of its own specialized skill set, would be project managing this transition. So maybe thinking about that, thinking about who or what organization, maybe it's a contractor, I don't know, manages the transition. I'm thinking about this a lot because I recently, this is a very small scale example, but I covered for a coworker of mine who left on sabbatical for 3 months, and I got no training on his job. And then suddenly I was in charge of 20 of his projects, and I just don't want anyone on the board to feel like, or any of the investigators or any of the staff to feel like they are suddenly on day one in charge of 20 of someone's projects that they have no training on. And so I am envisioning this transition as hopefully being one where there is, like, in maybe interdepartmental training. I'm thinking it's a lot of meetings between the staff who are being brought on board and the people who are already working on all of these things. It's like, I'm guessing many, many meetings. So I'm just thinking about comms and, like, sort of like, what can we do to set these groups up to have really amazing communication between them? In terms of people or groups that I would like to possibly hear from, I think Yumi Delgado kind of immediately came to mind. And other members of CRC who have, like, been really active, and they've talked to us before, but just asking people about, like, how do you train people to do this work, and like what should people know, and what are the pitfalls, and what's the subject matter expertise that you have about learning about all of the, not just how to do the work, but also all the city processes that are involved in that interact with parts of this work. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Lavisa. Commissioner, Co-Chair Faith. Sorry, Co-Chair Faith.
There, ditto to what so many have mentioned, and report backs, I think sounds really great. I agree. While I would love to be briefed in the full group, I just don't think that we have time. You know who had a lot of opinions about the transition? Commissioner Hardesty and Auditor Mary Hull Caballero. And I'd be curious to chat with them both. They had very different perspectives on how to handle the transition. And then I'm curious around sort of like the internal city, capital C politics of, maybe you saw the news a few weeks ago, but like budget change happened because Reimagine Oregon had funding, and then it got pulled because they didn't implement it, but they didn't implement it because the city hadn't released funding. And so there are a lot of shenanigans that happen like that in the city of political plays with money and projects. And so I guess I'm acknowledging that, thinking through how do we really have champions as we are doing this in alignment with the transition of our own city government, that we don't get lost. So I'm thinking of Commissioner Tim's suggestion of like the HR Bureau. How are we going to hire 40 staff within the period of a year? You know, there are so many things, like think of our procurement contracts that we had such a hard time with to get our wonderful facilitators on board. And that was just 3 facilitators. So there are just so many components around like the internal mechanisms of how this will work within the city that I think that we can be strategic in who we talk to. Mike Jordan came to my mind, Michael Jordan, of course, the NBA player, but our chief administrative officer.
Anything else?
Thanks.
Co-Chair, no, you're good. Okay, great. Thank you. Co-Chair Catherine.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. So I just had a few bits of follow up on some of the other recommendations folks made. First of all, on other jurisdictions, it may be useful to ask members of the research subcommittee if they, in their research, encountered background around transitions that either worked well or that worked poorly. I know in my work, I looked at the city of Chicago, and they had some real transition issues in terms of trying to set up a new accountability and oversight board, expecting it to, happen in a year, and it took more like 3. And a lot of it was just politics around who got appointed and how they got appointed. So that just comes to mind for me, that there may be members of that research subcommittee that could help on that. With respect to the third one, in terms of the entities that are going away, the third one I think is PRB. We have IPR, CRC, and PRB. That's sort of the current stacked system, and they're all going to be replaced by the new oversight body. But I think talking to PRB, it would be, I think it will have a different, it would be a very different conversation than talking to IPR or CRC, who are independent of the Bureau. And I am aware that both, I believe both the IPR and CRC are already engaged in transition discussions. So they're having these conversations internally. And I do think it would be, I mean, it would be certainly helpful for us to understand the conversations they're having, but also I think respectful to them to hear their views of the transitions that they are contemplating for their organization. So then on the internal affairs discussion, you know, Angie was saying that she really felt like she needed to understand more about their function before we could be thinking about their transition. And so, you know, if the other team, the other subcommittee is looking more deeply into does internal affairs continue, that may be one of those things where we just drop into their briefing so we could get that background on internal affairs. If that's just a way of potentially handling that issue. And then the only additional suggestion I have is someone or some group of members of this subcommittee having a discussion with the DOJ folks about how they view the transition. I mean, we talked about our expected timeline. I think it would be useful to talk with them about whether we're interpreting their intentions correctly. Do we, you know, the way we have gamed it out and mapped it out, is that how they're seeing it? And just getting a better idea from them what they're expecting in terms of the transition plan. Since this is all a part of the settlement agreement, I think hearing from DOJ is important in terms of making sure we've mapped it out correctly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair. Commissioner Cherie, just circling back, anything you'd like to add?
Thank you for circling back. I really like what several people have said. I really like what was just being said about having a conversation with the DOJ about their views on the transition. Dan perfectly said what I was thinking, in that, man, it's going to be really hard to get all this work in unless we can have like meetings outside and then come back and report back what was said. And I see that other people are supporting that too. That's all.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that conversation, everyone. We're now going to walk through the assembled information, and so we're going to move into discussing the content the subcommittee will discuss, including the content that was just mentioned. So we're going to ask to follow the normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times, and please be facilitated. And remember that we're using a weighted stack in our discussions. And finally, please be forward-looking in your comments. Would the co-chairs like to get the discussion started?
We'd love to do that.
Yay!
The discussion at hand is how are we going to do all this work? And yeah, so I think there are a few, so this isn't, we shared this earlier, this is just an outline of some of the topics that we need to consider in our transition plan. Maybe staff, if you could share a little bit about how our end document is not going to look exactly like the areas of agreement, but we are drafting a document. And so what we'll need to do is split up the work around, if you are very passionate about a certain topic within this transition plan and want to research further or write further, I think, well, actually, we haven't even decided if that's what we want to do. What we have been doing is splitting up subcommittee documents. Sorry, I got distracted by cat and the noticing of the cat. It's okay. It's a good distraction. So we need to, if we'd like to split this work up, which is Catherine and I's suggestion, for folks to volunteer and you don't need to do it by yourself if you feel more comfortable writing with a partner. So that's the work at hand.
Very good. Thank you so much. Staff?
Yeah, the question from co-chair Faith up front was about explaining how this document might differ slightly. Effectively, the areas of agreement model have in the third and fourth phases been documents which create conceptual understanding around what the new system should be or do in some way that will later be converted into code. The transition plan is the thing itself, as opposed to a interim step towards the thing, if that makes sense. So it should include, it's in the agenda and scope. It's the first document that the PAC's agenda and scope. It's the first document that doesn't have the phrase areas of agreement in there, and that it might look the same in terms of a format. It might be, you know, in the same sort of font and all that sort of stuff, but in terms of the content, it's designed to be directly implementable. And since and I'm not sure about this, but my understanding is it doesn't have to become code, that it would effectively be a series of steps with an additional timeline, and it could be that some things are sequential, some things are independent of each other, and an attached timeline, including at minimum the key dates and transfer of responsibilities. So ideally, it would be able to be shorter as a result of that, because it has it can just do the thing instead of describing the thing, and have a timeline as sort of a addendum to that. Does that clarify it at all, co-chairs? I don't know if that was what you were looking for in terms of clarity.
Very helpful. Thank you so much. Commissioner Deanne.
So I'm just trying to understand what we're doing in this part of the agenda now. So it says walkthrough of assembled information. Does that mean we're just going back through the same document we looked at before, or are we adding other ideas so that when these smaller working groups go off and write stuff, that some direction can be given from a discussion that we have collectively?
I'm going to hand that one to staff.
Gonna hand that one to co-chairs, please. Sorry.
Yes.
So let me just try to take a stab at that. I think that this is maybe the agenda is a little open-ended at this stage in terms of what we're talking about, at least in my perception, and I think this was echoed by what Faith said. I think we're at the point of the meeting where we need to figure out, okay, here's our task, and what are the subcategories that we can break it down into, so that we can all take a piece of it and then come back in our next meeting, which I think will be about 10 days out, with something to start populating the document called the transition plan. So that's my sense that that's probably what we're ready for now, is like, okay, we've had this discussion. I think we have some kind of general categories we can put out there that we can talk about, and maybe one thing that we may need to do after this meeting is try to merge the discussion we had around speakers and other information we need into these categories, so that the subcommittees then have their, the subcommittees have, like, okay, go talk to that person as a part of your work stream. So Samir, I know you and I had a discussion earlier this afternoon about how to break down the work streams for the transition plan into some subcategories. Is that something you could put in the chat, maybe for us to?
Just did, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. these are not definitive. These were, prior to, some ways, it was a little bit hard to make these categories in advance of the meeting without having the benefit of this helpful discussion. But this was at least something that Samir and I talked about just before the meeting as at least some sense of categorization. So the first one is basically the timeline. What do we do? What are the kind of at least the beginnings of the sequence that has to happen within that first year? What are the key things that need to happen in that 12-month transition period? Then the second one was another timeline issue, which is how, how does the IPR timeline work? We know they stopped taking cases after the 12-month period, but then they have to complete their cases. And we know we know roughly that they have 180 days to complete all cases. So that I think we will have an overlap that could be as long as 6 months. So just understanding that and thinking about that, I think, is another piece of it. Clearly a discussion with IPR would be important in that category. The initial in recruitment and selection of the board members, and this is both the issue of staggering. Do we have people appointed for 1, 2, and 3 year terms so that we've got that staggered terms? Is one of the issues that's been flagged to discuss is the mayor going to be involved in this given the potential timing, and then just really how we want to, since so much of the initial work of the board will be conducted by the board, how do we handle that initial period where we don't have a board? And that I know Lavisa had the idea of like a transition manager or something. Does that get housed in a particular bureau? I mean, those are I think the issues that may fall within that. The initial training for, I think this is both, I'm not sure if that refers, I can't remember if that's staff or board or both. And staff can explain when I'm done here. The question about possible hiring preferences for folks currently at IPR. I'm not sure about how CRC fits in that. And then I think the last one was the transition of files and information, which is one of the specific categories that's called out in the resolution. So then there's like a catch-all, anything related to transitioning away from things that are identified in the broader systems subcommittee that we then need to fold into our transition plan. So staff, is there anything in the discussion of these categories that you want to explain better than I just did, or add to?
I think that's a really good explanation. The only thing I'd just clarify is the initial training component is we originally wrote that for board members as they come in, given that there are no peers to do peer training. I assume that the conversation around who whatever staff entity within the current city structure is sort of managing the initial appointment and all of that would be able to ensure delivery of the staff delivered training that is envisioned in the subcommittee on board, or the areas of agreement on board membership. But in terms of the how the things that would normally be trained by peers under the areas of agreement on board membership, how that would be delivered would need to be figured out in there. Although it can't hurt to also discuss the staff part of it too, in that section. Yeah, and then in terms of number 5 and the comment about CRC, currently CRC is its staff support is IPR employees. So it would, addressing IPR in number 5 would also address CRC staff support.
Thank you so much, staff. Commissioner Dan.
Okay, well, I'm just going to take a little bit of a look at these 6 categories, and I have some ideas I'd like to float. So I'm hoping I can do this in 2 minutes. it seems to me that numbers 2, 5, and 6 are all intertwined. It all has to do with IPR and what's going to happen to their staff and their information. That numbers 3 and 4 can be handled separately as they're designed. And number 1 is dependent on everything else. So like we have to describe what's happening in these other points once we have that information back. So I don't think that can be done by itself. And we already have kind of a broad outline of that from what staff sent. So I think that might need to be pushed off till a second stage. That's my opinion about that. Then some of these things, like the question about CRC and the staff preference, we should also be talking about whether CRC members should get preference to become members of the new board. That's something that we should think about. In terms of who's going to do the training, we should ask CRC if they can help train the new people. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think would be really important for us to discuss, is whether the police review board can have, and we're going to have 33 members on the board, so this has to be done in very small chunks over the course of a year, but they can have members of the new board read the files and attend the board meetings, not say anything, but just so they understand what's going on, what the process is, and so they can understand for themselves how to read the files and how to make decisions. Because that is, I think, the hardest part. It usually takes a really long time for the CRC to understand all that. So in terms of that's just some ideas for the training. And then we also have all these other ideas that I think were put into the other bin, like stuff about body cameras and stuff. But when I wrote this up, I kind of came up with questions about what's the city have to do, what's the board going to have to do, and then who's going to do this other stuff, which is we've sort of discussed this already. Who's going to nominate the members of the board, because there aren't board members to nominate them, and then who's going to deliver the peer training, which was already brought up, and I'm suggesting CRC could be part of that. And then the 1, 2, and 3 year terms. Let's say it takes a full year to get the full staff up and running. That means the people who are serving on the first year, all they're going to do is get trained and hire the director. So hopefully we'll figure out some ways those people's second term to be easy for them to ease into, I think. Did that make sense? You know what I mean? So that they don't have 1 year of all they're doing is ramping up, and then they don't get to hear any cases. So that's those are some things I thought about. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Angie.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize number 6 and the transition of files and information is really obviously related to data and how we keep data. And I have a passion for this piece so much, just because of what I heard last Saturday at the public information session, but I just want to make sure data is as transparent as possible and as clear as possible how we're going to keep it transparent for those who come after us. So I definitely don't want to downplay number 6. I feel like number 6 is really, really important. Thanks.
So you're volunteering for number 6, is that?
I will volunteer for number 6. I will lead number 6 if that's what you guys want me to do. But yeah, it's really, it comes down to yeah, number 6 is really important.
Beautiful. And I'm thinking that if everyone wanted to do 2, that might be ideal. So I'm gonna.
You are not getting me to volunteer for 2 right now. Anyway,
all right. Well,
thank you. Thank you, Dr. Moses.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, Co-Chair Faith.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that these categories and the outline document that we drafted is a very good start. And this conversation, as Co-Chair Catherine mentioned, has been helpful. I think that the co-chairs can take this as well as the suggested folks that we want to chat to and smush them together in a maybe categorical way and send it out by email if folks are open to volunteering by email. what do people think about that?
I'm going to go to Commissioner Lovisa, then Commissioner Tim.
Well, I support the idea of letting people volunteer by email and having some time for co-chairs to take all of these ideas, because we've come up with a lot of ideas in our discussion earlier about who we'd like to hear from. It was sort of a mishmash of people we'd like to hear from and general ideas about what a transition plan might look like. But actually, I was raising my hand to co-volunteer with Angie for number 6 for transition of files and information, because I do a lot of this kind of work in my job, and I routinely see massive amounts of files going from like one government office to another government office, or one private office to another private office, and data privacy and security and confidentiality are so critical. And obviously there's going to be an enormous amount of really sensitive information here that is going to need to be shared really widely by a big group of people. So that is going to be tricky. And I would love to help make sure that everything is like housed appropriately.
Beautiful. Thank you so very much. Commissioner Tim.
Yeah, just briefly, really appreciated Co-Chair Faith's suggestion about kind of circling back via email on some categorical groupings and people to talk to and things like that. And yeah, would love to see what y'all come up with for some suggested directions, and then could weigh in on what appeals to us and get going. So this has been really interesting to hear, and looking forward to the next.
Thank you so much. So I'm noticing the time, 8:47, wanting to hold time for public comment. Going to Commissioner Dan now.
Sorry, I just want to say, if it comes down to it, I'm interested in number 4 about the initial training, because I kind of mentioned that in my spiel there before. So I'm willing to work on that. And I just want to kind of reiterate with the time crunch, I'm hoping that this new list and deciding who's going to do the work groups happens quickly, so that we have something to talk about at our next meeting, if we're not going to decide it tonight. So there's that. And one thing I put on my list, which is very hard to conceptualize because there's no staff until the director is hired and hires the staff. But at some point in this year transition, the office space has to come into existence. So that's something to put on the list of things for the transition plan.
Beautiful. All right. So staff, are we at step 7? Or are we at number 7? Commissioner Cherie and then staff.
Yeah, I'm really thinking about the conversation where, so we come up with a great plan, we hand it off. I just want to reiterate that, and maybe we need to put another number in here about how do we ensure that when we've got our finished product, we still have somebody to champion that, like somebody to take the ball and keep going that's representative of the PAC. I don't want to let that drop, because I feel like we do this amazing work and then things could get lost in the translation down the road. I don't know if it's a position, but I feel strongly that like we have the ball now and somebody has to have the ball through the rest of the phase where the DOJ picks it up. What if the DOJ has questions? Like, what were our thoughts during that, May 15th meeting? What would the PAC have thought about this? It's just really strong that, well, there's my 2 cents about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So now I'd like to go to staff and see if we are at the next steps.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we've been doing. Just checking in on it.
Effectively, yes. And I definitely want to respect the commission or subcommittee members who would like to choose via email. I also think from a timeline perspective, Commissioner Dan's point about having content to discuss at the next meeting is going to be really valuable. So if there are members who, like those who have already done so, have things they'd like to volunteer for, please feel free to drop something in the chat, and then we can get that. And then if you're not quite ready yet, that's also okay, and we can send out via email. We'll just ask that if you are doing it over email, that you respond quickly, so that there's time for you and your colleagues, whoever they may be on these drafting groups, to coalesce and start talking about this, so that there's some conversation and some content starting point by next time. I also think that Commissioner Dan's point about having new things that may be added to this list in future meetings will be helpful. And so getting some of these addressed may be helpful to create space in future meetings for those. So if you've got it, drop it in the chat. If not, then no problem. And then it's visible, and we'll recirculate that list as well. Does that work for co-chairs?
Yeah, I see people who are dropping information into the chat. Faith says she wants to work on the initial recruitment, selection and staggering. Commissioner Tim says 1 and 3. And Commissioner Cherie says number 4 with Dan is an option for me. And so we'll need 5 and probably.
So technically you can have up to 5, I think, in order to not make people have to volunteer for too many things. It might be helpful to shoot for 2 or 3 per group, just so that there's not one subsection that's completely ignored. But technically speaking, from a quorum perspective, there are currently 10 members of the subcommittee. My guess is that as scheduling settles, that might drop down to 9. Someone might move over to the other subcommittee. So 5 might be too big at that point, but yeah. And I'll get that all reflected and recirculated. Thanks.
Commissioner Tim also said he's interested in number 5. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Fantastic conversation. We will now take open comment on the issues the subcommittee is discussing, or community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 3 minutes in length, and raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. Are there any hands raised? Do not see any. Okay, very good. Thank you for the confirmation. Okay, very good. So then, this is the time for facilitators, co-chairs, and staff to summarize any items already brought up today which didn't fit into today's agenda. We'll recap those items here in the garden plot and use them for developing future agendas. We won't be using this time to add new items not previously mentioned or to discuss any items, but we will use this list to develop future agendas so we can address those items in the future. Co-chairs, are there any garden plot items that you would like included? Co-chair Catherine or co-chair Faith?
Not for me. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Corinne, facilitator, Corinne, are there any garden plot?
No, ma'am. Thank you. No.
You're welcome. Thank you. Staff, any garden plot items?
No, thank you.
Wonderful. Then we will move on to our next slide. As a reminder, you can now submit advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form voicemail, or postal mail. Thank you to all of the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. I also want to thank our interpreters, and finally, thank you to the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. If you've not already done so, please sign up for email updates. Please also sign up to receive updates from the PAC. It is now 8:55 p.m. And the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you so much to staff and co-chairs and facilitators. Thank you.